New polling shows that the word liberal is on a comeback. According to the results of a survey done by Gallup, 31% of Americans describe their views on social issues as generally liberal. Now, that matches. What's significant about that? It's significant because it matches the percentage who identify as socially conservative for the first time since Gallup records were kept back to 1999. Now, that's important. 31% describe themselves as socially liberal, which is the same as social conservative, showing that social liberalism is on a it's not so much on an incline as social conservatism is on a decline, even though both are generally moving in one direction or the other. Social conservatism, as I'm going to go into explain, is on the decline, and there are several different factors to that. Well, first, let's go into some of the details from this Gallup poll. Now, Gallup, of course, first asked Americans to describe their views on social issues back in 1999. Are you socially liberal? Are you socially conservative? What are your views on this? Well, and they've repeated this question every year since 2001. Now, this broad trend has been toward a shrinking conservative advantage. There are less social conservatives than there used to be. Now, that makes sense with demographics and such. So, except, and this is notable, which is why I bring it up, the first 2 years of Barack Obama's presidency, you saw an upward trend in social conservatism. Interesting how that kind of correlates, right? Okay. So anyway, let's go to the poll. Now, from May, this comes from a Gallup poll conducted in May, the early part of May 6th through May 6th through May 10th, and it found that a high of 53% of Democrats, including Democratic-leaning independents, described their views on social issues as socially liberal. Now, Democrats are, of course, more likely to be socially liberal, which makes sense, but they describe themselves as being moderate. So even though their views are socially liberal, they say, no, we're not liberal. We're moderates. We're not crazy. We're just moderate. We're in the middle. Interesting. Now, I think that comes from, and Gallup generally agrees with their assessment of this, is that it's because liberal has been used as a pejorative since at least the Reagan administration, possibly even sooner, even dating back to JFK. So let's keep that in mind. Now, they would do this, call themselves moderates, from 2001 to 2005. Now, socially liberal Democrats since then have outnumbered socially moderate Democrats in all but 1 year. Now, what about Republicans? Let's get into Republicans. 53% of Republicans or Republican leaners say their views on social issues are conservative, and that's the lowest in Gallup's trend. The drop in Republican self-identified social conservatism has been accompanied by an increase in moderate identification. Yeah, those social conservatives, people like Rick Santorum, too conservative. We're not quite that bad. Okay, we're not crazy like you guys. We're moderate. We're still conservative, but we're not as conservative. We're moderate. So it's the same thing that's happened with social liberalism. Everybody wants to be to say that they're in the middle, which it makes sense. Now, the drop in Republican self-identified social conservatism has been accompanied by an increase in moderate identification to about 34%, while the percentage identifying as socially liberal has been about static at about 10%. So still, a huge disparity. Now, what about economic issues? So you see social issues, socially liberal people are catching up, and on issues, for example, gay marriage, most of Americans, majority of Americans, 60%, are okay with gay marriage. They say, you know what? Let's let people who love each other, who are in a committed relationship, get married, and let's stay out of their lives. Now, that's a huge opposition from social conservatives, and we've seen it. I've covered a lot of it, where they're like, no. Gay marriage will literally destroy America. Now, that's their argument. God's going to lift his hand of protection away from America, and then we're just going to implode. Okay, interesting theory. Not going to happen, but thanks for sharing anyway. But what about economic issues? So we see liberals gaining ground, and a lot of socially liberal causes gaining ground. What about economic causes? Well, according to this poll, by a margin of 39 to 19%, most Americans identify themselves as being fiscally conservative. Now, I'll get to the meaning of that a little bit later, but let's go through some of the numbers. 64% of Republicans, identify as conservative economically, which is down from about 70% the previous 2 years and roughly 75% in the early years of the Obama presidency. During the George W. Bush's administration, Republicans were actually less likely. So Republican president, Republicans were less likely to say that they were economically conservative, with as few as 58% doing so in 2004-2005. The trend suggests, and this is from Gallup, that Republicans' willingness to identify as economic conservatives or economic moderates is influenced by the party that controls the White House. Now that is interesting. So Democrats in the White House and we're totally conservative on economic issues, man. We are economic conservatives. But you get a Republican in the White House, they're like, no, compassionate conservatism, which is what George W. Bush used to say, at least before 9/11. So what about Democrats? So, Democrats are also contributing to the trend in lower economic conservative identification. While the plurality of Democrats have consistently said that they are economically moderate, Democrats have been more likely to identify as economic liberals than as economic conservatives since 2007. The last 2 years, there's been a 15 percentage point gap in liberal versus conservative identification among Democrats on economic matters. Now, Gallup goes into some implications about this whole thing. And what this means and what's contributing to this is several different factors. These terms, long-term trends may be attributable to changing attitudes among Americans of all ages, but they also may be a result of population changes, with younger, more liberal Americans entering adulthood while older, more conservative adults pass on. Makes sense. Gallup found evidence that the population replacement is a factor in explaining changes in overall ideology using an analysis of birth cohorts over time. Now, they also go into 2016. It'll be a contest of more socially liberal electorate and a less economically conservative one than was true of prior elections. So this is why we see Hillary kind of tagging to the left and Bernie Sanders gaining steam among a lot of Democrats, among a lot of liberals that have actually heard of him. Now, I think it's our job as actual liberals to tout Bernie Sanders and to make sure everybody hears about it and his economic plan.